would love to introduce our panelists. So we have Brandy Jones from the Mount Vernon School. Hi, Brandy. We have Paige Camises, who is from BBNN. We have Gowrie Maida, who is from the Oregon Episcopal School. And we have Tyler Ravlin, who is from Sunnyside School District. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to the panel shortly with our first question. So to get us going, guests, I'd love for you to begin by answering this question. Given the fact that we are still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, what were some of the grading shifts that you had to make as a result of COVID-19? And how has COVID-19 really changed the way you think about grading? And I'll open this up to any of our panelists who want to get us started to kick off the event.
I'll give it a try. Can you hear me? All right. Yeah. So a lot of my motivation came from a course I took from GOA over the summer, competency-based learning, where I really wanted feedback to be the center stage. And I decided to take a very big step in grading, and actually this lockdown pandemic served as a good time to make that change, which was to eliminate anything called a grade book with, I teach math, so with quizzes, the usual quiz category, homework category. I just said, I won't have it. And then I had to figure out how to then turn it into a feedback. Now that there are no points I'm putting, how do students know how they're doing it, whether they're learning or not, and how do I know whether they're learning or not? So my biggest change was really to not have a grade book in an Excel a spreadsheet type of a grade book. That was a big change I did.
For me, last year before the pandemic hit, my department chair who was teaching honors physics with me, we decided we wanted to go and move towards competency-based learning and away from traditional grade books. So we were already set up where we weren't necessarily doing things that are called quizzes and tests. We were having our kids work and do kind of assessment style things where they're working on a problem in physics, and then it's all based on reflection and feedback from the teacher. So going into the pandemic, we actually realized that this is what we wanted to do, and we didn't have to change anything in what we were doing because of the way that we had shifted in our classroom already.
And I'd say likewise at the Mount Vernon School a few years ago, the entire school made the shift towards competency-based education. And like we also did away with like tests, quizzes, just like you're hearing. And so when we shifted to online learning, there wasn't very many changes we had to make. The only one that really sticks out to me is trying to figure out a way to have like the informal conversations that I would normally have in the classroom.
And I think for me, thinking through the shift that I really went through with kind of the remote learning and COVID and all of it is, I think we always know the impact that grades have on students' emotional health, but I don't think it's ever been more emphasized than it is right now. And so, for me, like I surveyed all of my students every single year and ask, how do grades impact you? And it's overwhelmingly negative. And so, I work in a high school where I wish I was very jealous when Gowrie was talking about getting rid of grades. That's my goal. I would love to do that, but that's not the reality of my context. And so for me, the goal is how do I downplay, or I guess put off the inevitable grade so that it's not in the way? Because as soon as that grade shows up, that's where the attention shifts. And so my focus through all of this is I want to provide students as much feedback as I can and push the grade off as long as possible. And so the term that I've started using is, like, where am I looking for evidence of learning? And that has really shifted my mindset. Talking about COVID is, I'm no longer collecting assignments that every kid has to do and they're stressed out about it, but I'm looking in as many places as I can for evidence of learning, so that when I get to the end, I have so much data that I can accurately really triangulate the student's level of understanding. So, that phrase evidence of learning for me has been a helpful shift during COVID.
I love that from all of you in gallery. When you said you weren't tracking grades, I was thinking it was interesting because my follow-up question was, what does your grade book look like? But maybe it's not a grade book, but what does your, this is really for all of you, like what are the concrete ways in which you're tracking and then sharing with students that, like to Tyler's point, that evidence of learning?
Yes. So first to clarify, Tyler, our school does assign grades, and I do have an obligation to assign a grade at the end of the semester. And also at any point, if a student wants to know a grade, I need to have a way to tell them. So to get to Bonnie's question, at the beginning of the year, I shared in the Google Classroom, which is our learning management system, a Google Sheet with learning indicators. So as we go through every lesson, I add a few more of the learning indicators. So lesson they do has those learning indicators at the top of the page, and then it's also copy pasted into the into the Excel spreadsheet. And then throughout, I've given them in the lesson itself indicators of what it means to say, I know this topic, I can do, I can prove an exponent law. What does it mean? How does that look like? And they had practice with that, both in small group discussions and on the Padlet discussions. So in a lot of ways, they had practice with me and in their teammates and outside before they could say, I already know it. As Tyler pointed out, evidence of progress. It was something I designed so it could be evident to them whether they learned or they couldn't learn, either way. And they also kept a math journal in which they jotted down what they were working on at that moment and how come they think they don't know it, and what's the next step they're taking, and how did they find out later on that now how come they can say they know it. So that was my method.
For me in my classroom, we also have to give grades at the end, but no individual piece itself is graded. It's the evidence of learning, the body of work, the portfolio that I then discuss with the student at the end when it comes down to the grading period. We have a 5 to 10 minute discussion and they put forth their evidence for, here's what grade I think I should get. And then I say, hey, I agree, or hey, maybe it's a little bit lower. And in doing that, me and the student have always come to the same grade range, and sometimes they actually put themselves a little bit lower. But where they do the individual work to figure out, like, how do I know where I stand? We have a reflection period that we run every between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on what the weeks hold. And there's indicators of, I can do this. On content, we're in the middle of a switch, so we're trying to get away from content, but that's kind of where we're locked in right now. But there's also skills in their lab skills, and they have to say how comfortable they feel in it, why, point to evidence, and then they gauge their self on how do you feel you're doing? Do you feel like you're emerging, you're developing, you're proficient, or you're secure in your understanding? And then they use that, their 4 reflections from the trimester, to then discuss what their overall grade should be for that marking period.
And then we've recently switched to a platform called Altitude, where the assignments are basically linked to discipline-based competencies, and all our feedback is directly related to those competencies that have been assigned for that grading period. And so if I click on a competency, and one example for science would be I am able to create an argument or explanation based on the data presented. Like if I click on that competency, I'm able to see all those students' work associated with that competency. And so we're able to track how the student's doing and give feedback in that platform using their actual learning outcomes or competencies. And then just like Paige just said, at my school, every 2 weeks, we'll link a letter grade to that like proficiency scale that we gave them previously. So in that way, we've kind of decoupled the feedback from the grades that they receive.
As soon as Brandy said Altitude, I wrote it down because I have yet to find a grading platform that I like and does what I feel like we need to do for kids. And Paige mentioned the idea of being able to have conversations with students about their data and about their learning and allowing them to be a part of that grading process. I think in terms of talking about gradebook setup, the biggest thing that I have had to grapple with is my grade book for the longest time was primarily organized by assignments. And by that, I mean like the primary method of how everything was laid out was, quiz 1 happened this day and the reading check happened this day. And what I found is when I tried to sit down and have conversations with kids about their learning and their data, it was impossible to see patterns and trends. And that's where most of that meaning lies. And it was because of the primary method of organization. So now when I think about it, instead of just assignment, 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 there are now spaces where this is for one skill and here are all the attempts at that skill. And it really allows me to have conversations with students where I can say, hey, let's look at, I teach high school ELA, let's look at our ability to, analyze a central idea in a text. Here's how you've done so far. What is this telling you? Like, what's our next step? And just by reorganizing my grade book, and I use a Google Sheet for this. Like, it's nothing fancy, but it allows me to really have more meaningful conversations with students because we're not talking about tasks, and I hate talking about tasks. It's organized by learning, so we get to actually talk about learning.
I love that. And thank you all for just providing really good concrete ideas, because it would be great for everyone to walk away with something that might feel actionable. And the title of this workshop is about how to make grading sustainable. So you've all talked about like what your grade book looks like and kind of how you're tracking. Love the like image of a Google Sheet, Tyler. But how do you make all of this sustainable? Just that's a huge piece of, I feel like this academic year is just sustainability from a teacher's perspective and also from a student perspective. How do you make decisions about like what to grade, how much to grade?
So on our end, I think with physics, I'm also a chemistry teacher, but I'm only piloting this in my physics class. It's a lot of problem solving based. So, they're attempting problems. So what we've done is made answer keys that then they are responsible for checking their own work and reflecting on their work. So it's not just a, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? It turns into, why did I get it wrong? So having a lot of student reflection with their work has been huge in making all of this sustainable. To be quite honest, my enthusiasm for what I'm doing has kind of been in the COVID times a little waning because I'm just burnt out and I might not be up on my grading as much and feedback as much as I can be. But the students are still pushing themselves because of what we set up in the beginning of the year, that they realize that their reflection through their own work is really where they're going to get their learning from. It's not coming from just me, it's coming from themselves as well.
I want to add to what Paige said about the fabulous system of reflection for students. I use a similar system. And now the daily lesson does look like a math problems that they do, a combination of them. They also learn from my videos. But and then I look at a few, so if the lesson has 5 pages, I will look at 5 students' work and download the work and put in my comments and post it at solutions. And then side by side, I have a Padlet called Lesson Solutions for whatever the lesson's name is, 16A. And students have to now compare their work with that, and then goes back to what Paige was saying. They have to reflect on, I did this because I didn't understand this, and now I've seen the solutions and I understand this, in some way of letting me know on the Padlet. It's a public Padlet, meaning well for the classroom. So that's the reflection system I'm using, similar to what Paige said, but it's everybody can read everybody's reflection. And I feel that has really added, that somehow made us feel like a big community, all of us being able to articulate what it is they're struggling with and how they're moving forward with it.
And I've been working closely with the science teachers in the upper school here to create rubrics, like robust rubrics, but that also cross multiple classes so that we aren't recreating rubrics from class to class and the students know what to expect. So from their end, it requires a little less work and interpretation from class to class, and that's making it more sustainable for us, but also for them. And then also every 6 weeks, we're only focusing on 2 to 3 learning outcomes or competencies. And so that makes it a lot easier for us to just really focus on those versus trying to grade everything.
And I would add on the rubric piece. I mean, I think what everybody has mentioned so far is in order for this to be sustainable, we have to partner with kids in that assessment process. Like, we can't take on all the work really ever, but especially right now when we are all feeling very burnt out, and this is really difficult. And so to build onto the rubric, something that I've started doing that's really been helpful for my students, because I think so often we want students to self-assess, but they have a really, really hard time doing it. Even if the rubric is there, making it concrete and helping them really understand it can be a difficult process. So I just started, for example, if I'm helping them develop varied sentences, I might have a level that has, I can develop simple sentences, I can develop compound, I can develop complex. And each of those levels are hyperlinked to instructional resources, right? So like I can develop simple sentences has a link that they click on to see what's a simple sentence. And not only does it help the student figure out exactly where they are, because they can say, I don't know if I know this yet, click on the video, and then it's either, yeah, I do, or no, I don't. But it also gives them sort of that forward focus of, okay, if I am at this level right now, I have a resource right here that tells me here's my next step for learning. So for me, in terms of helping students really understand that self-assessment process, it seems like a little thing, but adding resources and learning materials right into that rubric has been incredibly valuable for me.
I feel like you all touched a bit on the ways in which you might be leveraging technology to help make grading more sustainable. I'm just curious if there are other really concrete examples of technology that you're using that helps either make that reflection for students more attainable or grading more sustainable for teachers. Any tech tips?
I get really excited about this one. So I think I'm an instructional tech coach, so obviously I get really excited about all this. One of the things that has always kind of been difficult for me is, if you look at the research around feedback, the short codes, the short snippets don't actually result in learning, but we do them because we have to be humans, right? Like we don't have all the time in the world. And so I have a number of friends who, they work on the coding side, and they've talked to me about text expanders, or this idea that they use shortcuts where you can type in 3 or 4 letters and it populates an entire comment. And it allows you to not only save time, but you put the whole comment in there, and you can add links to instructional videos and resources. Yeah, I see there's some called ProKeys in Google Docs. I use one for Mac called aText. Google Classroom, if you use that, actually has it built right in. But, for me, a really helpful tool has been finding some way to save things that I know I normally have to give feedback on, right? If I teach freshman English, I see comma splices everywhere. So I have something set up where I type .cs and an entire description of what a comma splice is shows up with a link to a couple videos that help reteach it. But it's, it saves me hours and hours over the course of a term. But it also, that return on investment. I'm not investing a ton of time to get minimal results back. I'm investing a smaller amount of time to get better results back. So that, some sort of text expander, something like that has been one of my favorite tech tools to discover in terms of assessment and feedback.
Just thinking about collection of work, I know that what COVID has brought to the forefront of my brain is that I can't have everything in 5 million different places and think that I'm going to work efficiently. So something we've used is OneNote. It's multimedia. You can insert PDFs, pictures, you can type, it allows a lot of work together. And I'd say it's better if it's just a collection and a give back feedback to your students. It doesn't work as well as a Google Doc for collaboration. It's possible, but in real time, there seems to be some issue with the syncing because of it's an app, whatever. But it's really easy to collect a test. It's collect homework, and I can write on it with my iPad and stylus, and it's made the collection and giving back of assignments online just a whole lot easier.
And I've really been overusing Peer Deck, Poll Everywhere, just so that I can get real-time feedback from my students. So as I'm going through class, I'm checking to see if they're following me, if they understand, and they're able to reflect on those Peer Decks as well. But I get one central location where I can see everything. And then I know some of the humanities teachers here love to use Kaizena, I think that's the name, in order to give voice feedback to their students as they're going through essays and such. And so it's shaved a lot of time off of their work with the students.
So we'll kick off a really important question about student motivation and grades. We got a lot of questions about this when some of you submitted questions for the panel. How do you motivate students to do work that isn't graded?
I think oh, sorry, go ahead, Gabby. I think from my standpoint, a student actually quoted this when we came back from break. She goes, "If nothing's graded, then everything's graded." And they realize that it's a body of work that they are presenting, a portfolio idea. So a way that we talk about it to the parents at the beginning to let them know why this is a good idea. Like if you get a C on your first test, you are now being standardized against that C. So why would you want to do that to a student? It's all about growth. But on the flip side, just because you can perform well on one day doesn't mean that you are a master in what you're doing either. So it's this idea of being able to, consistently grow within yourself and also grow in your understanding. And I should throw in the caveat that I'm an honors physics teacher. So I also at an independent school. So I already have motivated students and then I have even more motivated students. So, but I think it's that idea of the portfolio body of work idea.
Mine builds on Paige's idea. It is really what you said. It is putting the focus on the system of how you learn. Today you watch these videos and you're submitting this lesson, and then comes the solutions, and then comes a pattern. It is just and I too teach honors level classes, so maybe we are at an advantage where students are already motivated. So I found that it's an advantage when you don't say homework counts as this much and that one counts as this much, and there's no game to play. It is that in order to learn this indicator, these are the steps one takes. And you may very well, because make considerable progress just after doing 3 or 4, but most students want to complete everything, all the resources, all the activities I've given them, so they can get really good at making progress on an indicator.
I think what's been a game changer for me is having students co-create the classes with me. So for example, in my most recent biology course, I had 2 upperclassmen help me plan out the course with feedback from me. And then once I put everything together, they went in and gave their comments. And the freshmen that I taught it to were so excited about every step that I didn't have to force them to do anything. And then like midway through the class, I asked them to self-assess, but I also asked them to assess me. And so using their feedback, I correct and make changes to create a class that they're excited about actually doing the work. And for those that aren't completely motivated by that, there's always someone other than me looking at the work. And so either it's a peer from the school somewhere or it's another adult. They seem to be really motivated and they don't want to disappoint others.
I normally just get feedback from students like after the lesson is planned, and what Brandy said, I can't emphasize that enough. Like I hit a wall at one point this year where I just was really honest with my freshmen. I said, like, this isn't working and I'm really at a loss for what to do right now. Here's what we're going to do next week. How are we going to do it? And we started planning ideas together. And I said, here's what I'm thinking. And they sometimes told me no. And they said, here's a different idea. But that following week was probably some of the best engagement I've seen. And so I think, it really speaks to that power of ownership. And a lot of times I think the entry point for us is choice, where, I'm telling you to do A or B. But I think when we really move to this spot of here's this essential learning we have to do, and I want your help in figuring out how to make it meaningful for you. I heard so many of us mention that idea of motivated. Like, my view is every kid's motivated about something, and it's our job to figure out where that is. Like, it's not our job to manufacture motivation in the classroom. It's to say, to create that space. And this is where, when we talk about assessment, being able to take away the tasks and really say, this is the learning that needs to happen. Very few times have I found kids that can't find a way to tap into that learning, right? When I say this is the task you have to do, that's the hard time for me to get kids motivated, because I'm not excited to do. Like, if someone says you have to pay taxes, I'm not excited for that task. But if someone says, like, hey, I want you to be financially independent and stable, like, okay, I can get on board with that. And so it's this idea of really focusing on, here's the learning we're going to do. How can you engage in this, right? Like, how can you provide, to use the term, evidence of learning? And I found, opening that door for students is messy and it's hard and it takes a while to get used to as an educator, but that's where a lot of that, the motivation that already exists is hiding there behind those doors.
Thank you all so much. We also received a lot of questions about designing for equity and grading. Tyler, I feel like what you're talking about there with relevance and like entry points for all students really does get at some of the designing for equity. What's the specific shift? This is really for the whole panel, in your grading or assessment practice that you've made, this year to ensure equity?
Say that we decoupled like behavior from the actual grades that they received. And so they're not typically penalized for late work. I do allow reassessment as long as they can show that they are ready to reassess. So in that way, everyone learns at a different pace, and they're not penalized for not getting it exactly when the rest of their class understood the material. And also norming across multiple teachers. And this goes back to the creating rubrics that can be used for multiple classes. We also norm as we grade to make sure that no matter what class a student ends up in, they're being assessed in the same manner.
I can give this a try. For me, equity has meant that, first of all, giving resources that every student can use. So I started it at that level. And then what Brandy mentioned about students learn at different paces. So even though I had a clear schedule with due dates, it was somewhat tweakable because the focus was on understanding. And so that was one change I could do, just because we are in this online setting. And also for the final assignment, one of the portfolio elements was creating a video on a certain proof, and I gave them a choice. Some were easy, some were difficult. They knew that, and I said, what it would take, the one that you think is going to be the right level of challenge for you. So I felt all of those tweaks, instead of just giving the exact same question to everybody, they could do different questions and still demonstrate to me their reasoning skills.
I think I'll revisit the rubric idea. Someone shared an article with me recently that talked about kind of the racial bias of grading, and it looked at what can we do about it. And the biggest thing that they said is a norm, like you have to be working as a team around a specific rubric to be able to find sort of that common ground and that common language. For me, a big practice that I really have always questioned, but am very closely examining this year is, I think that most of us are used to this idea of your grade is an average of scores over time. And to me, like, that is a incredibly inequitable approach to determining a student's grade, because, if the idea of equity is students get what they need, some students are going to need 3, 4, 5 attempts before they really understand it and learn it. And if I'm averaging scores over time, I'm devaluing that student's growth by saying, yeah, well, you didn't get it at the time I wanted you to, and so to me, that that ends up causing some huge issues of you look at, if you know, you have a student who starts at a 1 and gets to a 5, they're going to have a lower grade than a student who started at a 4 and stayed consistent with no growth, you know. And that is, to me, that is mind blowing. And if you think about the message that sends of the student with no growth gets a higher grade, well, there's the message, right? We don't care where you start. We don't care where you end. We care where you start. And that is not at all the message I ever want to send to my kids.
I see a lot of head nods. Tyler, I'm curious, and this really can be for the rest of the panel too, but specifically, is this you doing this within your school? Or do you feel like there's had to be a school-wide approach to grading in order to sort of pull off this, what you're describing?
It's, if you have a school that can get on board, awesome. You know, that is incredible. I think, you know, assessment is something people hold to stronger than anything else I see in education. I'll say from in my position, I've been working with my school on assessment for 5 years, but I would still say that for the most part, I have to go rogue occasionally and do what's best for kids. You know, there are demands that systems have, and I understand that those have to be in place, but they don't always align with what's best for kids. So I will say, if you're doing this alone, the hard part is helping students wrap their head around it, because they are ingrained in a culture of grades when they're at school. They're used to playing follow the leader with their teacher for, you know, 13 years until they graduate. And so when they get to a spot where it's, here's the learning you want to do, and I want to give you ownership and control. And this is why I say it's messy at first, is if you're not in a school that has a culture of that, then it's difficult to do on your own, but it's possible, I guess is my answer for it.
To piggyback off of Tyler, 100%. I wouldn't be doing this if my department chair wasn't doing it with me. So having a department head who is the one who's driving this, and then also having a willing upper school director who is also like, oh yeah, sure, that's totally great. I think it's important to always do it with somebody else, whether you're in conversation with the students you're working with or other faculty members, because doing the GOA CBL over the summer, I was trying to do one of my assignments and I couldn't because I needed to talk with somebody, and I just happened to be with another educator over the summer, and it's amazing just getting that other perspective from somebody else. And just to speak really quick to the equity piece, I loved what Tyler was saying. It's like you're supposed to compare yourself to yourself previously, not to what I expect you to come in with. So I think what normally we get we probably get a handful of students dropping down from honors to regular because it's too tough. I couldn't do it in the time. In my 3 years that I've been working with my department chair with this, 2 years teaching it, 1 year shadowing, we've had 0 kids drop honors physics, and everybody's been able to stay through and just really show growth within themselves, which I think is huge and speaks to an equity piece. Why wouldn't a student be able to stay into a class where we think they're going to grow just because they couldn't do it for the first 3 weeks?
Thank you so much, Paige. So well said. I want to turn it over to Deep, who's been moderating the chat. We'll transition to see if any questions are coming in from participants. Deep, do you see anything that we should ask?
Yeah, sure. So one just came in from Courtney around starting the process. How do you know where to start? And I think we can, I'm not sure exactly what process Courtney is referring to here, but I think just this process of shifting grading practices. Where do you start when the rest of the school might not also be engaging in that same shift?
I'll begin by saying, first of all, even if the school's not engaging in the shift, I think you do need to have make sure that you have some support from your department chair, from your upper school head. In my case, definitely I had support from all places, department chair to upper school head to director. And also it really helped to be engaged in a 4-week course with GOA, where I could look at all pieces, and then the assessment piece, the learning indicators, all of the units. And then where I really started was, interestingly, with that grade book. I wanted to change that. I made that the center stage, and then everything else kind of fell into place once I decided to take that route.
I can say it's just an ever evolving process. And I think the biggest thing that my department chair said in the first year I was shadowing her, she's like, I don't want to give grades anymore. And I was like, okay, what are we going to do? And it was kind of like we made that choice. And then we've been trying to fill in like what we really need is 2 years of non-teaching and like everything stop and you can figure it out. But we don't have that. So it's kind of building the plane while we fly idea, and things are just changing as we're going. And it really starts with okay, I don't want to give grades. How am I going to give the feedback? And what's the best way that we're going to be able to make this visible for students and teachers? And that's why it's important to have the conversation with people in your community or the GOA community. You don't have to, well, taking the course obviously is really helpful, but you can reach out to anybody and you can just start conversations with people.
Brandy and Tyler, and then we'll transition into next steps. Would love to hear your thoughts on this.
I guess I would say 3 big things for me, and one has to start with the recognition that part of the reason grading hasn't changed in so long is because it works for teachers, right? And so I think we often are asking people to change something when they don't see a problem with it because it's doing what they might want it to do, whether that's convincing kids to turn in work or whatever. So I would say the first thing to do is get some student voice in there. Right? Like the conversation at our school started because we surveyed kids about grades, and honestly, it's horrifying to see how it impacts them. And I think it's really hard to stare that in the face and say we're going to do nothing. And so I would really encourage you to get voices from students, get their perspective on grades, ask them how they impact them. And at that point, that has been the catalyst. And most of the places I've worked or schools I've worked with regarding assessment, it's really hard to hear that kids are suffering because of grades and do nothing. So I would really say, if you're looking for a place to start by asking kids, because that will make the most difference.
Yeah, I completely agree. Start with student voice, and families. Make sure all the stakeholders are involved in the decisions. I think what grabbed my attention initially was taking one student's grades and comparing it to the different math teachers, and depending on which math teacher they had, their grade would have been different from an A to a B minus. And so seeing that significant difference, just depending on whose teachers you may have, made an imprint on me. And from there, there were several different book studies that we completed as a staff. And I think the next step, we just stopped using those categories of tests, quizzes, labs, and start thinking more a whole picture of what are we really assessing for each of the tasks that we ask students to do. And all of those were very small changes, but we got a huge amount of growth from the students and feedback from both the students and the families that they understood what we were looking for more. And that's how we started.
Thank you all. I appreciate both the boldness and the concreteness with which you approached answering that question. So thank you all. We are approaching the end of our time together. And so I'm just going to briefly share my screen and share some next steps. We do have a couple of facilitated workshops that are on these topics. One is actually on designing for equity and grading, and another on assessments that promote equity, integrity, and rigor. A few of the panelists mentioned some of GOA's offerings. We actually have a CDL series of courses. The next one begins actually on Monday, and it's called Competency-based Learning from Time-based to Performance-based. Could be a good fit, but register soon as the registration closes tomorrow at 7 p.m. We have a free for anyone course called Designing for Equity also next week, a math course and a science course at the beginning of March. And then we have newly announced summer programming, so check that out. And then of course, stay tuned for future networked events, we'll be doing this again. And I have a feeling that we'll be offering something on grading again, because it is such, I feel like we could have done even more, and it would be great to even have this group of panelists back. Thank you all so much for your time, and we hope to see you at a future event.